involved in that and then in the development of what became known as the Partnership for Peace. And the basic theory was that the United States, because it is part of the same geopolitical zone as Europe, had twice or maybe three times in the 20th century been forced to cross the Atlantic to help Europeans straighten out the mess they'd made of their affairs. That was the case in World War I. It was the case in World War II after Japan attacked us at Pearl Harbor. And it was the case, arguably, in the Cold War. And so it was clear that we had to remain involved in the security affairs of Europe. And it was also clear that it was a time for Europe to have a unified defense architecture, and the Partnership for Peace was designed to provide that. It asked two things of European countries newly liberated from the Soviet satellite status in which they'd previously suffered. One was that they emulate Western European political military culture by having a civilian defense minister, subjecting the defense budget to parliamentary scrutiny and approval, and allowing the parliament, that is, the electorate acting through its representatives, to supervise defense policy. The second was that they developed the ability to contribute rather than simply consume security from others. And that meant mastering the 3,000 standardization agreements, which allow a Greek and a Turk who, despite their antipathy for each other and their lack of a common language, to cooperate in a search and rescue operation or some other military operation because the standards are common. There are 3,000 of these agreements. And so these were the requirements. And we were pretty confident that most Eastern Europeans would meet the requirements. And indeed, the Czechs very promptly did, the Poles somewhat later, the Hungarians, the Slovaks. We also were quite confident that Ukraine would not want to join the Partnership for Peace as a path to NATO membership, because that would bring down the Russians on them. We thought they would want to master the standardization agreements, or STANAGs, but that they would probably want to keep their distance from NATO. And that was indeed the case until the George W. Bush administration succumbed to neoconservative triumphalism and invited Ukraine to join NATO over the initial objections of other NATO members. The Russians made it very clear that if Ukraine joined NATO, they would be forced to act militarily, for the same reason that if a hostile power were to garrison Tasmania, since you're in Australia, I believe, the Australian government in Canberra would be obliged to act to dislodge it. Or if a Chinese force set up in Mexico, the United States would, as it had previously, after our Civil War when the French did that, intervene to expel them. So we knew, we should have known, that we were paving the way for a war with Russia, and that is exactly what has happened.